Today, in episode 218 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to expert Robert Jordan, and he's going to tell you what type of leadership style you predominantly are and how you can be most effective. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it.
Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show.
Yes, welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for coming out yet again to another amazing episode. And today we're going to be talking about leadership styles, as Robert likes to refer to it as. And I'm going to be upfront and honest with you. I don't necessarily agree with the term style for this episode, I would suggest, but rather think of it in terms of your predominant leadership theme, maybe how you operate, okay? Because up front, the reason why I disagree with the term style per se is because I did a whole episode on different leadership styles, and I talk about a leadership style spectrum that we operate within on a daily basis, and that as leaders, we need to be able to slide across the spectrum depending on the situation in front of you. And what Robert is discussing in this episode, and for his term of style, it's kind of like where you operate at most effectively, where you're most comfortable. And it's not necessarily a style to me per se, but rather, a theme that you operate under. So you'll understand as we go into the episode. Now, all that say is this is a great episode, jam-packed with all kinds of great nuggets for everyone out there. So yes, you don't want to turn this off. And yes, you definitely want to listen, regardless of my intro of a little bit of disagreement, which is always, a good thing. We need to be able to have more of these professional and honest and respectful disagreements out there so that, we can have conversations. And Robert and I basically have that. So that's what you're getting out of this episode. But before we dive into the episode today, I want to ask you, how are you doing as a leader? Do you feel lonely? Do you feel stressed? Do you feel lost? Because we have a solution for that, right? We do have the Leader Growth Mastermind, which is our paid community for leaders who are looking to, level up their leadership game, essentially. We have weekly video conferences where we get together and we discuss the topics of the week. We have weekly curated content around different themes, and we go through each month is a different domain of leadership. So if you're listening to this real time, and this is May 2022, we're actually talking about leading your organization, and we're talking about culture. And more importantly, we're talking about being respectful to different races and ethnic groups and how to lead effective teams that are diverse this week, actually. So if that's something that's of interest to you, then check it out. Check out the Leader Growth Mastermind. And you can do so by going to movingforwardleadership.com/mastermind. And there you're going to see all the detailed information. So if you feel like this is where you need to be, if this is a place that's going to help you elevate your leadership and help people, help your team, help yourself, and help your organization more, then it behooves you to check it out. Get any questions? Drop me a line, Scott at Moving Forward Leadership, and I'm here to answer. I know some people have asked me about payment and such, and I tell you, if the first 30 days this is not for you, cool. I will gladly give you your money back. Let me tell you, for $29 US a month, I am not in it for the cash, but rather I'm in it to help you. So again, check that out, movingforwardleadership.com/mastermind. Anyway, that's enough for me. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Robert Jordan about being the right leader at the right time.
Bob, welcome to the show, sir. So good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So we're talking today about your book regarding leadership styles, which I find super interesting and fascinating because we have a little bit of, I wouldn't say a difference of opinion per se, but just difference of perspective on this topic. So I talk about what I could refer to as the leadership style spectrum, i.e., on one side, you got a laissez-faire leader. On the other side, you got the super authoritarian leader, and then a wide range of control, how much you can control as a leader between the two. Whereas you have just 4 different styles in your book, and they range on not necessarily a control aspect, but rather what's needed aspect. So can you talk to me about how you came about that in the first place?
Sure. And I don't think your take in terms of laissez-faire versus authoritarian is mutually exclusive from what we're talking about. There are all kinds of metrics out there, as you know. For example, there are personality-based profiling, intelligence-based. There's a thing called cognitive profiling, which is the instinctive, intuitive way you perform work. There's a lot of validity in these things. Our particular take came around from having this ringside seat. We have this organization called InterimExecs, and organizations approach us, and we're a matchmaker. And so we will put a leader into a role, and it's our contract. And so while the work's being performed, we're asking the owner or the board, how's it going? Everybody happy? And we're asking the leader we put in or the team we put in, how's it going? You all happy? And observing this over the years, we came to see that there were these 4 distinct patterns of excellent leadership. At the same point, we have been approached, it's now over about 7,000 executives who kind of showed up on our doorstep. And the vast majority, frankly, they don't have exceptional careers as leaders. They're okay. They're not great. And we saw these glaring differences between the majority and what the top 1 or 2% were doing in terms of these distinct styles. That's what motivated us to write the book, Right Leader, Right Time.
No, I really like it. I like how it's simplistic. So you go on 4 different styles, right? When a company's in chaos or decline, it's time to call a fixer. When it needs creative jolt, it's time to jump out of stagnation, turn to the artist. When a company needs new markets or big growth, hire a builder. And then when it reaches complexity and it's time to scale, basically align with a strategist, which I can see all that. And I can see how even in my, relatively still short career, I've been many of those. Like, I can definitely tell you I've been a fixer. Let me tell you, there were times when, it seemed I referred to myself as the firefighter because whenever things were on fire, I seemed to be the guy who got the call and be like, hey, Scott, come deal with this, please, because we have a burning, raging fire that needs to get put out. And now I'll also see myself as a builder slash a strategist. I would say artist is probably my weak spot. I'm not the uber creative guy. I can't draw. I can't even draw a stick man. My 6-year-old son is definitely a better drawer than I am. I can't play a musical instrument to save my life, so creativity is not necessarily my forepoint. But the other three, I can see aspects of it and different points of my career, and where I was within organizations. So let's dive into them, shall we? And let's talk about the fixer first off, because I almost feel like there's probably a lot of organizations out there this day and age actually in that mode, because they're probably still dealing with COVID, the Great Resignation, and there's a lot of problems that's going on right now within organizations, and no doubt that they're leaning heavily towards that fixer mindset. So let's talk about that one first. So dive in, like what is a fixer? Well, it's kind of self-explanatory, but I'm sure you got more to say about it. But what are the great aspects of being a fixer?
Sure. And if I could just double back for a moment, looking at you, for example, these traits and qualities you have in terms of ability for turnaround and building and being a strategist. We would never try to pigeonhole any leader and say, you're this and you're nothing else. That's not true. All great leaders, they bring their whole selves to this. And that is a vast range of skills and abilities and attitudes and being very nuanced. The example we use in the book is it's a little like DNA, right? They're just 4 nucleotides and they make up all of life. Whether it's plant, animal, you, me, just 4, but in this repetition of the billions of times, and that is it. And that infinite variety is the same among leadership. What we have observed is that among excellent leaders, there tends to be a dominant
Yes.
trait, style, mode that comes to define them. And not that it's locking them in, but it is the thing to which we use this phrase in the book, it's their highest and best use. So, for example, you've been called in many times as firefighter, and that absolutely fits what we've seen in other leaders who have a dominant fixer style, because what it is they're kind of generalized as a leader. And then someone says, well, let's throw a problem at Scott. And Scott does a great job handling it. Well, if Scott did a great job handling it and he got kind of an adrenaline rush out of it, could be that you're going to gravitate towards it again, and then again, and then again. That's our definition of fixer it's the repeatability to go into the burning house, the burning building, as opposed to, for other leadership modes, yes, you do it when you have to, but you're not drawn to it.
Oh, well, yeah. So I got 2 points already to add to what you just said. So first off, I liked what you talk about, how, we're not all just one, but rather we have a dominant one, and then we kind of enable the rest of them, because that's exactly how I talk about with the leadership style spectrum. So I actually ran my mastermind community through this there the other week of, listen, here's the spectrum, like I discussed. And I said, the best leaders out there, what is your leadership style? And I say none and all, because based off the situation, the scenario, you want to enable, act on one of the styles, vice just simply picking one all the time, because it's not a one style fits all. You have to adjust your style based off the situation in front of you. However, that being said, there is going to be one that we generally gravitate to, and we need to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of that style. And that's exactly what me and my mastermind community, we actually ran through there. I think it was last week, actually. So this is quite fitting, actually, time-wise. The second thing is the fixer, the adrenaline rush, and all that. I would say yes, 100%. So actually, before we hit record, we were talking about my career and how I'm still active Canadian military. So I'll even throw this out. I don't think I've actually even talked about this online. So my current job is actually I'm a part of Canada's High Readiness Joint Deployable Headquarters. blah, 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 blah. What does that mean, actually? I don't know if I'm going home at the end of the day every day. I may be called at a moment's notice to literally deploy to anywhere around the world for an indeterminate amount of time. And that is very much a fixer type place because we're actually going in to set up a new operation anywhere in the planet. So yeah, do I get yes, I do get an adrenaline rush. It's like, when I haven't had that fire for a while. I remember talking to a buddy of mine, and it's been a quiet while. I was like, just need a good fire. It's been a while. Right. So yeah, totally understand where you're coming from there. So
yeah, it is the classic definition, and it's just different from other styles. And you're exemplifying what that is. And it is a remarkable ability, and it's not the way everybody is wired.
Yeah. It's exhausting,
because
though.
It comes so easily to you. What's that?
It's exhausting.
See, you think because it comes easily to you, it could be to everybody, and it's just not the case.
No, I could see that for sure. So what are some of the, strengths and weaknesses of this style? If someone who's in this style as a fixer, now, go ahead, pick me apart. I don't really care. Take me as a case study if you want.
Well, one of the funniest quotes from, we did a lot of interviews with leaders to either confirm this theory we have about fixers, artists, builders, and strategists, or to blow it apart. And one of the first CEOs we talked to, he brought this up. We didn't even ask him about it. He said, if I put a fixer into one of my companies and it's not broken, he'll break it just because he's bored. And that stuck with us. All of these styles have a negative, dark side if they are not governed. All of them. And it's interesting because, I'm kind of wired for this because we spent 5 years writing this book. But there are examples in the news all the time. I'll give you one from the UK. There's a ferry line there called the P&O Ferries. And the CEO fired 800 people on a video call. Now, that's occurred in the US as well, but in the UK, it's actually illegal to do that. It's crossed the line of the law. And it's black humor, but it's pretty interesting that, when I read this story in the paper, the CEO was called in front of members of parliament, and there was a quote from one of the MPs, and the quote was, he said, the first question he asked of the CEO, he said, "Are you in this mess because you don't know what you're doing, or are you just a shameless criminal?" So that person in strategist mode, 3,000 employees at P&O, wasn't even a great decision because firing 800 permanent employees to replace them with contractors, that's an issue of safety. They operate ferries, ferrying passengers and cargo. But that is an example of strategist either in wrong mode or simply run amok.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that, especially the part you said about, putting a fixer in a company that's running along fine. They're going to end up breaking it. I catch myself constantly going, how can we improve this? How can we make this better? What's next, et cetera, et cetera. So, I could definitely see that. And at the same time, I often do look at things like, wait now. So I guess I kind of have this dual mode to myself where, if it's not broke, let's not, if it's not broke, let's not fix it. But at the same time, like, but can we make it better? So it definitely is an internal struggle, I would say, for myself to make sure that one, I'm not breaking things that are broken, but at the same time, like trying to push the envelope because I firmly believe that the world constantly changes, and us as leaders, we need to keep up with that because if we don't, then we and our organizations eventually become irrelevant, which is that's not how we want to lead neither. So it's definitely a dichotomy per se. So the next style is the creative style, the artist. Let's talk about that one a bit. Obviously it's about being creative and stuff. But what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of that style?
Artist style is what we call compelled. And to give you a contract with fixer leaders tend over time to discover, based on first they're in a leadership role, then they're put into crisis, and they see how they perform against crisis. And so that's a skill and a wiring that develops over time. Artist mode for us is something we describe much more as compelled, in the sense of you have to do it, even at peril of career, money, power. And I have to tell you, just personally, I put myself into this category. I am a classic entrepreneur throughout my career, and it is in some ways to my peril. It's not necessarily been a great thing that I was always leading from a point of view of what's the new product, what is the new service. It's a particular kind of wiring that, well, I'll give you an example here that is in the news, is Elon Musk. He's the premier artist leader of our age. And there are critics who are saying, like, Tesla stock got dumped because he's now going to buy Twitter. This is in addition to the fact that he has SpaceX. He wants to put people on Mars. He has the Boring Company. He's got mind control. All of this is going on. And for someone wired, for example, as fixer or builder, this would be madness. Because fixer, for example, is a style where you put out one fire at a time. It is what is optimal for that style. Artist mode, it's not. Artist mode is a parallel processing kind of thing where artist leaders need distraction. So our prediction, for example, is he's going to do just great with Twitter. Now, I'm not sure how this works in terms of, I'm not talking about the substance of Twitter in terms of he wants it to be even more free speech. I wonder about issues of safety in the future. But in terms of his ability to be successful in artist mode, driving different businesses, he's absolutely wired to do that. So in artist mode, he's an extreme example. The artist on your team, it's the renegade. It's the person who does not fit in. They clearly are the oddball. And yet this is a person who can come up with some of the most creative ideas. Used to be exemplified pre-internet. There was much more of advertising agencies being creative arms to a lot of companies. Many people in creative mode gravitated there. I think it's actually a reason why, if you look at a lot of advertising, and what is driven by search engine optimization online, lacks creativity. It's become an analytic activity, and that purely creative drive, it's not present in most marketing campaigns.
No, it actually makes a lot of sense, especially the last bit for sure, because so much is driven now by algorithms, right? And
Right.
that is pure math, just computation. So now, would you say that what am I trying to say? Artist leaders could also be grouped as visionary leaders per se. Those visionary ones out there that people go, "Oh, that's crazy." There's no way that as you said, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs often gets labeled as a visionary leader, for example, with all the work that he did with Apple and so on and so forth. So, would you kind of clump them together?
Visionary is clearly an aspect of it, because the artist leader is the person making the exponential leap. And if I know you are expert at mastermind groups, and so for your mastermind members or for your listeners out there, if they're running a business and that business is stagnant, that's an automatic sign that they're missing part of innovation, creative, that artist leader kind of component. It's not a fatal flaw. It doesn't necessarily even these days mean you have to permanently add, you have to make a new hire, even if you don't have it. The modern world is full of project-based resources. So much of the world has become compartmentalized in the kind of services offerings that people make to the world, and consulting and SaaS and all of that. But where you see stagnant organizations, you're seeing you're seeing a lack of that innovation gene inside the company.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of
But
sense.
but to your point directly, Scott, visionary, it shouldn't be that it's just the preserve of the artist leader. The close companion to that is that strategist leaders have to be very good at vision and mission and purpose. That has to be a driving force for organizations at scale where there cannot be that personal span of control. You know, from your service in the armed services, you can't know everyone. And your leadership can't be a function of you and I have a personal relationship. You trust me, I trust you. There's something going on at scale there. That's the province of a strategist leader.
Makes a lot of sense. Actually, now makes me want to, okay, let's keep going with the strategist leader, because we kind of just dovetail right into it. So let's talk more about that strategist leader. So you already talked about mission and vision and intent, which is, me as an Army guy, right up my alley, right? Like, yep, check. That is, we literally talk about that all the time, mission, vision, commander's intent, so on and so forth. Obviously, those are key parts of being a strategist leader. What are some other key parts? And then kind of like what you did with the first one, the fixer, what could be some of the downfalls to that style, especially in the long run?
Strategists, there are incredible parallels, because you're dealing with complex or very large organizations. There are great parallels between military and large civilian organizations. By the way, one of the strategists we interviewed in the book, Janine Davidson, was the former Assistant Secretary of Defense. She had a very large organization. She was a fascinating interview. She's an interesting move. She moved from being the Assistant Secretary of Defense in the U.S. to now she's running a university, Metropolitan State University, Colorado. The strategist leader was interesting. One of the quotes, one of the leaders, he said, there's a cadence to every organization. In particular, to larger organizations, there is this cadence, there's this heartbeat, there's this syncopation. And at great organizations, strategists, they feel this. And it's for the organization as a whole, but also its component parts. When you think about businesses, there's a cadence to the board, there's a cadence to the marketing function, to the finance function, to operations, to the software teams. And that's a very nuanced thing for a strategist leader to be in sync with that and to understand, using mission and purpose and values, how to drive that organization forward. It's a fascinating thing. So also, to your point, you're talking about where does it go overboard. The example we just talked about with the P&O ferries is an example of a strategist leader who just, really? Should you really be in charge of 3,000 people? The strategist, because they're operating at scale, runs the risk of, is it the word hubris? That there's just, they're in charge of too much. And tons of companies around the world exhibit this. Historically, for example, in the US, you look at things like Enron. And it was an amazing company and very innovative. Then at some point, you've got 4,000 entities off the balance sheet. And you can't even, the accounting is so bizarre that it couldn't really be audited. And eventually people end up in jail. And that is strategist leaders run amok there. Just too far.
Yeah, I had a former Navy SEAL on, and he talked about hubris, leadership hubris, and so on and so forth. He actually co-authored a book all around that, dichotomy, essentially, of being confident, but at the same time going too far with it, and then having the hubris come out. So, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I would say if you're a strategist, if you're too deep into the strategic aspect and, mission, vision, intent, being optimal, being efficient, being super efficient, lean, etc., eventually what happens is your organization is going to stagnate, right? Because And we actually kind of see that in the tech world lately between Apple and Microsoft. So it's interesting because a couple of years ago, I'm a techie. I like technology and stuff like this, right? So I follow it fairly closely. And an interesting thing that came out one year was that, in the past, Apple was the one always seen by the younger crowd as being hip, cool, trendy, et cetera, very creative, focused. But when they got so big, obviously they went more streamlined, very, efficient, so on and so forth. So towards that strategy side. Whereas Microsoft, because they were on that side, they streamlined, became super efficient, very business focused, blah, 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 got looked at as dull, boring, etc. And of course, didn't really attract that trendy young crowd. But then a couple of years ago, we actually saw the trend completely reverse. And Apple was being seen as boring, dull, so on and so forth. And some of the innovations Microsoft was bringing out was actually looked at as trendy, exciting, creative, and stuff like this. So if you're stuck in one of them, it can be a detriment over the long term. You kind of need a balance, I would say.
You're 100% right. What we talk about, we talk about these differences between fixers, artists, builders, strategists. We also talk about three common elements. And one of them, the saving grace, that holds brilliant, genius leaders in check, has to be collaboration. You can't be a great leader without a great ability to collaborate. And it sounds easy to do that, but most average leaders actually are not great at collaboration. The other two common elements that have to occur to be, as we would say, a great FABS leader is, first, you have to have this courage to be able to double down. So what great leaders do is, for example, having a proclivity for being a great fixer or for being a great builder is you have to keep reinforcing that. Sounds easy. Most leaders don't do that. Most leaders actually, over the course of their careers, they dilute themselves. We sometimes call this the 3 Ds. There's dilution, there's delusion, there are detours. What you see in a lot of careers is, let me ask it this way, Scott, because I'm sure you've seen this among companies you coach in your mastermind. You ask the owner, you say, well, are you targeted where you want to work or your clients? Big companies or small? Oh, either's fine. Okay, well, and is your primary area, is it local? Is it national? Is it around the world? Oh, it's okay, whatever. And is there any industry focus? No, I can do anything. Okay, that kind of being all things to all people, it sounds very obvious, which is it doesn't work. But the majority of leaders, their careers actually express that way. It's too diffused. It lacks focus. There's not enough doubling down. It's to the point of where we'd say it's a little delusional. And in the end, they just appear to be a lot of detours. It's not, everybody determines their own career path, but what you see in successful leaders is they are in fact doubling down the more that they discover their own expertise. The final third point, we call it no hiding, which is accountability among great leaders. And again, I could give you all kinds of examples of leaders who hide. It's tragically funny.
Now, that last bit, accountability, it's crucial, and it's actually one of the core tenets of the mastermind community. So I do ask the members every week, I'm like, hey, who needs some accountability this week and where? And yeah, guess what? You're getting a shout out in our private Facebook group. Like, have you done what you said you're going to do this week? Have you taken action?
Did you do it?
And guess what? They're like, oh crap, yes, I did. I've been meaning to do this for a while. I'm like, well, there's a reason for that. It's because you're scared to say no, that you didn't do it. But I do want to double back to what you were just talking about. And something came to my mind was you're kind of talking about how, we as leaders kind of need to double down in our areas and focus on, that predominant style and embrace it, so on and so forth. So through your research, did you find, or did you come to the conclusion that as leaders, maybe we come to a point where we make that decision, that self decision where it's time for us to move on. That, us being at the head of this organization or involved with this organization will soon become a detriment vice being a good. Whether, I fix all the problems that need to get fixed right now. Now we need someone to come in and build or be creative, or we need that efficient strategist to come in, or the strategist realizes that they've been there too long and they're like, oh my God, we've drained the creativity completely out of our company, et cetera, et cetera. It's time for them to move on. Have you come to that conclusion?
Absolutely. And it's most relevant here probably to talk about builder leadership style. If you ask most people at organizations between these 4 different styles, fixer, artist, builder, strategist, everybody wants to be a builder. Everybody is a builder. Everybody's like, of course I'm a good builder of people and organization. Yeah, we get it. That is true. But we mean something specific with builder, which is this repeat ability for market domination, to take product, service, team from something that is not at scale, that doesn't have dominant position, and to take it to that. And for those leaders who are wired that way, what you tend to see is when they've arrived at that peak, they will want to move on. New product, new service, new company, new client, new team, whatever it is, to have that experience all over again. System, process, people, from something that is not dominant to dominance. There's a more specific definition of what it means to have primary wiring as a builder in an organization.
That's awesome. Yeah. I could see that everyone wanting to be the builder, because it kind of feels to me like the builder is kind of the one that gets all the credit, lots of cheers, like, woohoo, yeah, you've entered new markets, you made a new product, whatever. There's a lot of I don't know, gusto or like pumping up for that style. A lot to be said for it, but at the same time, not all of us can be it. Not all of us, nor do organizations need all of us to be the builder per se. We do need some fixers. We do need some visionary strategists. We do need some creative styles. So, do you find the most successful companies out there have a good mix of these? And is there some kind of ratio, or is it 1 for 1 for 1 for 1, or do we need one fixer, a couple creative types, maybe a builder or two, and then one key strategist? What does that look like if someone's like, I want to make my leadership team around this model, go hunting for these people, but I don't want to off balance per se? What would be a solid balance there?
I like how in addition to interviewing leaders, we interviewed organizational psychologists to feed back to us, are we crazy, or are we on to an interesting theory dynamic of these 4 styles? And one of the psychologists we interviewed, he said, on a team, you have to be spiky. And what he meant by that is, if you were looking at a graph, Scott, and you looked at traits on a team, the spike is a high point for an individual in some kind of ability. And what he said is, to be accretive to the team, you just have to be spiky in 1 or 2 or 3 ways. Not all of them. No one would be. And so successful teams, you would see when you're comparing traits among people, that there are these complementary spikiness in terms of abilities. We've put out one lens on what that is between fixer, artist, builder, strategist. And, what we'd say, now, by the way, I should mention, in addition to the book, we're in the process of launching a leadership assessment. It's called FAB's Leadership Assessment. It's free, and it's just meant to be a tool for people, a little more information about yourself in terms of what your unique wiring is. And it's really for the purposes of have a conversation with your team, for them to know you better and you to know them better in terms of, how am I spiky and how are you spiky?
I like that spiky analogy for sure. I thoroughly enjoy it. Bob, I thoroughly enjoyed this whole conversation, actually. But, as all good things must come to an end. But as we wrap up here, I do got a couple last questions for you. The first question being a question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. According to you, Robert Jordan, what makes a great leader?
What makes a great leader? My first answer on that is always around integrity. It sounds so obvious, Scott, but I don't find that it is universally accepted. I think it gets a lot of lip service, but we place great stock in integrity, being your word, honoring your word. I think that's first and foremost.
Sadly, couldn't agree with you more on part of that. And, integrity, trust are cornerstones of leadership, because without it, you just can't lead, man. You just can't lead. So I thoroughly enjoy that simple yet powerful response. And then final question, how can people find you? How can they follow you? It's all about you. Shameless plug. Have at it.
You can find us either at InterimExecs.com, which is matchmaking between organizations and executives, or rightleader.com, where a person can also find the FABS leadership assessment and can take that for free.
Awesome. And for you, the listeners, always, it's easy. Just go to the show notes. So in your podcasting app, you click open the show notes section, scroll to the bottom, and the link to this episode is right there. Again, Bob, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule, sir. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. And it's been a great conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Scott. It's been an honor to be with you.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that, help me, help a friend, win-win all around, and hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.